The moment a man in cargo shorts tried to arrest me while I was performing CPR on a dying kid, I remember thinking something strange. Not anger, not fear, just this quiet, sick realization that some people care more about rules than about breathing. And if you've ever held someone's life between your hands, you know exactly how terrifying that realization is. Because when a heart stops, every second is a small war against death. And the day that war was interrupted by a homeowners association security guard with plastic authority and real handcuffs, a 16-year-old boy named Jalen lost his life. My name is Diego Rivera. I've been a paramedic for 10 years. I worked night shifts that blur into sunrise, highway wrecks where metal screams louder than people, overdose calls where parents collapse on the floor before we even bring the stretcher in. When you do this job long enough, you develop a strange instinct. You start running toward chaos before your brain even decides to. That instinct is exactly what put me on that basketball court. I wasn't working that day. I was just helping my sister move into her new condo in a gated community called Pine Ridge, the kind of place where the hedges are perfectly trimmed, the sidewalks are spotless, and every third sign politely reminds you that you're not supposed to be somewhere. Quiet neighborhood. Pretty. Controlled. The kind of place where people think bad things don't happen. I was carrying a box of kitchen plates in her condo when I heard the scream. Not the playful kind kids make when someone scores a basket, this one cut through the air like glass breaking. Before I even thought about it, I was already running. The basketball court sat at the end of the block, surrounded by low fences and neatly painted lines on the asphalt. When I got there, a group of teenagers stood frozen around a boy lying on the ground. He looked young. 16 maybe. His lips were turning blue. His chest wasn't moving. One of the kids was crying so hard she could barely talk. He's not breathing. Training takes over in moments like that. You don't think, you act. I dropped to my knees. Call 911, I said, already placing my hands on his chest. Tell them cardiac arrest. Teenage male. CPR in progress. 30 compressions. Hard and steady. The rhythm you practice hundreds of times until it becomes muscle memory. One kid held his phone out with shaking hands while another kept repeating Jalen's name like it might pull him back. I counted quietly under my breath. 30 compressions. Check pulse. Nothing. I grabbed the portable AED from my bag, something I carry even when I'm off duty. After a decade in emergency medicine, you start realizing that emergencies don't respect work schedules. The AED began charging, and that's when the black SUV rolled up. The words Pine Ridge, HOA enforcement were stenciled on the side. Out stepped Rick Masterson. I didn't know his name yet, but I'll never forget the way he looked. Mirrored sunglasses, tactical vest, a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt like he was about to clear a building. He approached like he was the authority in the situation. Step away from the resident, he barked. I didn't look up. Medical emergency, I said. Licensed paramedic. Go wait for EMS. Rick stepped closer, his voice tightening. You are not authorized to perform medical procedures here. This is private property. I felt irritation rise in my chest. I'm saving his life. Rick folded his arms like a man reciting rules from a handbook. You're trespassing. Unauthorized medical practice. You're endangering him. For a moment, I just stared at him. Because sometimes the things people say are so absurd your brain needs a second to process them. I'm a paramedic, I said slowly. I've got ID, equipment, and 10 years of training. What I don't have is time for HOA nonsense. Instead of backing down, he pulled out handcuffs. Last warning. The AED beeped. Shock advised. The boy's body jerked when the shock hit. A desperate attempt to restart a heart that had fallen silent. I immediately went back to compressions, and that's when Rick lunged. He grabbed my arm and yanked me backward in the middle of a compression. You're under citizen's arrest. My shoulders slammed into the pavement. Kids started screaming. Phones appeared in the air recording everything. One teenager shouted, "He's trying to save him." But Rick was already forcing my hand behind my back. The metal cuffs snapped shut around my wrists. And in those seconds, the seconds when someone should have been pressing on Jalen's chest, nobody was. The AED blinked beside him. The boy lay still. 6 minutes later, the police arrived. By then, the ambulance crew was already pulling a black bag from their truck. I sat on the pavement with my wrists still burning from the cuffs. One of the officers looked at the AED, my trauma kit, my EMT license, then turned slowly toward Rick. "You arrested a paramedic?" he asked. Rick straightened like he'd just completed a heroic mission. "He wasn't authorized to be here. This is private property." The officer sighed and unlocked the cuffs. I stood up slowly. I didn't yell, didn't argue. I just watched the ambulance crew zip the bag closed. Because deep down I knew something that would haunt me for a long time. Jalen might have had a chance, until someone decided authority mattered more than oxygen. That evening the video hit the internet. A teenager had filmed the entire thing. Within hours it was everywhere. HOA security arrests paramedic during CPR, teen dies. Reddit exploded. News stations picked it up. Hashtags started trending across social media. Justice for Jalen. CPR is not a crime. The clip that spread fastest showed Rick shouting, "You don't belong here," while I yelled back, "He might not live at all." I didn't want the attention, but something bigger than me had started. The next morning I called my brother. Emilio Rivera, civil rights attorney, the kind of lawyer who doesn't scare easily. When I told him everything, he stayed quiet for a long time. Then he said something that sounded less like a promise and more like a storm forming. "We're going to bury them." Within 24 hours, Emilio filed a lawsuit against Pine Ridge HOA, wrongful detainment, obstruction of emergency services, negligent homicide, depending on the autopsy results. The press conference happened outside the hospital where I'd been treated for bruised ribs. Cameras everywhere. When reporters asked what I wanted to say to the HOA, I kept it simple. "I hope they enjoyed their power trip," I said, "because the real authorities are coming." Then came the twist nobody expected. Internal HOA emails leaked to the press. One message from the HOA president read, "No unauthorized personnel during crises. Control liability and PR optics." Another line hit even harder. "We don't care if they're licensed. If they don't live here, they don't touch our residents." The backlash was immediate. Commentators called it the privatization of emergency care. Then a former volunteer named Lena stepped forward. She revealed that Rick had created his own security manual, copied from military guides, training volunteers to detain outsiders. Zip-tie drills, hand signals, neighborhood patrols. "He made us believe we were the law," she said. When those documents leaked, the outrage exploded. Federal investigators opened an inquiry. City officials began drafting legislation to stop private security groups from impersonating first responders. People started calling it Jalen's Law. Inside Pine Ridge, chaos erupted. Residents argued with the HOA board. Insurance companies threatened to withdraw coverage. Protesters gathered outside the gates, holding CPR mannequins with signs that read, "Had a heartbeat until you stopped it." Rick made things worse by appearing on a fringe podcast wearing a fake military uniform. "I did what I had to do," he said. "Real paramedics follow rules." That clip aired on national television next to footage of Jalen's memorial. From that moment on, Rick wasn't seen as a protector. He was seen as a warning. Months later, the lawsuit ended in a massive settlement. Rick was fired. The HOA president resigned. Several states passed legislation limiting the authority of private security groups. But none of that brought Jalen back. A few weeks after the trial, I met his parents in a quiet hospital chapel. His mother held his basketball jersey in her hands. She asked one question. "Do you think he could have made it?" I didn't lie. "Yes," I said softly. She nodded slowly, like she already knew the answer. Then his father looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "Then make sure nobody forgets this." That's the strange thing about justice. Sometimes it arrives in courtrooms, sometimes in headlines, and sometimes in the quiet change of a law that saves the next life before tragedy repeats itself. What I learned from that day is something simple but uncomfortable. Authority without wisdom can be dangerous. Rules without compassion can kill. And the moment someone values power more than human life, they stop protecting a community and start threatening it. So I'll leave you with a question. If you saw someone performing CPR in your neighborhood and they didn't technically belong there, would you stop them? Or would you step aside and let them save a life? Because somewhere out there, another heartbeat might depend on that choice. And I'd genuinely like to hear what you think.